Okay. They see her struggle to her feet.
Because my body was in shock.
Echoes call from hollow halls, a voice that creeps and softly crawls. Time stands still, the air is...
On May 31st, 2014, in the quiet suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin, 12-year-old Peyton Loetner was lured into the woods by two classmates she called friends. There, in a patch of leaves and branches, they turned on her. 19 wounds tore into her arms, legs, and torso as she fought to stay conscious and alive. Somehow, she dragged herself from the trees to a bike path, where a passing cyclist found her and called for help. And as disturbing as this was, it is only the beginning. These are 6 most disturbing videos on the internet. Home is supposed to be the safe place, the place where doors close softly, and the only sounds are familiar ones. On a summer afternoon in Muscombe County, that certainty shatters. 35-year-old Deborah Fraser has been unable to reach her boyfriend for more than 12 hours. That alone is alarming. Her relationship with 66-year-old Thomas Wadewell has had its pauses and reconciliations, but he is steady in one way. He always answers. A grandfather and a patient woodworker, Tom does not leave texts unread. He does not let calls ring out. The silence gnaws at her until she drives back to his apartment on August 10, 2023. Inside the door, nothing feels right. A cleaning lady is gathering her supplies. Finishing up, the lock, Deborah notices, is not set. Maybe Tom forgot, she thinks. Then her stomach drops. The place is ransacked. Drawers gaped, belongings scattered. A light burning in the bedroom. She calls emergency services, her voice tight. She fears someone has broken in. She cannot find Tom. As she moves toward the hall, 2 figures step from the master bedroom. Their faces are covered. One wears a mossy green sweatshirt, jeans, and a black ski mask. Deborah glimpses pale skin through the eye holes and the edge of a jaw. The other man pushes past her. Words die in her throat. She grabs at the gun in the first man's hand, trying to turn the barrel away. The weapon bucks. Fire and noise.
All units, I have an active home invasion. Okay.
Pain explodes in her leg. She collapses near the entry, still on the line with the dispatcher, crying out that there has been a home invasion. Officers arrive within minutes. They find Deborah in the doorway, bleeding from a gunshot wound through her thigh. A .22 caliber pistol lies on the floor beside her. Paramedics rush her towards surgery. Deputies clear the apartment. The intruders are gone. In the back bedroom, police find Tom. He has been dead for hours. His body is wrapped in a comforter and several trash bags, secured with duct tape. 2 long Velcro straps lie nearby, as if used to drag a heavy weight across the floor. Nothing else appears missing. Tom's valuables are still where they belong. His firearms are present. There is no sign of drug activity. No obvious motive for a burglary gone wrong. The careful wrapping, the absence of theft, the staged chaos, it all points in a different direction. This was not a robbery. This was personal. Detectives meet Deborah at the hospital to take her statement. She suggests a possible source of hostility, Tom's estranged wife. She describes anger issues, infidelity, a separation. Could she have sent someone to the apartment? Deborah insists she does not know. She repeats that 2 men came out of the bedroom and fled. She says she wrestled the gun away and it fired. Investigators canvass the building and pull footage from nearby cameras. They log who comes and goes in the day before the shooting. No one matches the masked men Deborah described. A new detail sharpens their focus. Deborah did not sleep at the apartment the night before. She stayed with a friend she calls Johnny. She explains that on the afternoon of August 9, she took a walk, then called Johnny. He picked her up in a white sedan and took her to his place. She says she popped back briefly for a backpack and saw nothing out of place. She says she spent the night away, then walked the next morning with Johnny at Blackhand Gorge, a nature area about 20 minutes from Tom's address. She says she tried to reach Tom by phone and got no reply, which was strange.
Tried to contact Tom. I texted him, I called him, and I never heard back, which was weird.
By early afternoon, Johnny dropped her at Tom's building. Moments later, she says, the masked men appeared. Detectives speak with Johnny. He corroborates the time he was with Deborah, but offers a different texture. He says she seemed upset when she got in his car and did not want to talk. He also shares a secret. Deborah told him Tom was not her partner at all, but her patient. She said she was alive and nurse. Johnny had no idea she was in a relationship with Tom. Tom never knew about Johnny. For 10 years, Deborah appears to have constructed separate lives. The officers return to the apartment with a new lens. They catalog Tom's phone, then trace location data. They compare the movement of 3 devices: Tom's, Deborah's, and Johnny's. All 3 show up at the apartment and then move north toward Blackhand Gorge. Deborah's and Johnny's phones continue to ping throughout the county through the night and into the morning. Tom's phone stops moving. It never leaves the apartment again. The medical examiner delivers the first anchor point. Tom died from a single gunshot wound to the head. The caliber matches the pistol found beside Deborah when officers arrived. The window of death falls within 4 hours of 9 in the evening on August 9. That period overlaps precisely with the time Deborah says she was with Johnny.
Well, what do you think happened to Tom?
I honestly don't know.
Detectives confront Deborah with what they have learned. There was no home invasion. There is no camera footage of masked men running from the building. The emergency call audio can be enhanced. It does not capture the chaos she described. Her timeline drifts. Her answers fray.
Well, Tom was shot and killed.
They asked to search her phone. They already have a warrant. They already know what its history will show. For days before Tom's death, she searched for answers to a very specific question: how long gunshot residue stays on skin, how to remove it. They also learn about a strange scheme. Weeks earlier, Deborah asked Johnny to call Tom, pretending to be a bank fraud investigator. She created a fake email account that imitated official messages from Tom's bank. She sent herself messages about an investigation into withdrawals from a joint account in both their names. Records show that account had been drawn down to about $2,000. Detectives begin to wonder whether Deborah misused funds and feared being exposed. Evidence from the apartment returns from the lab: the duct tape that bound the bags, the plastic itself, the Velcro straps, all bear Deborah's DNA, and only her DNA. Her hair is embedded in the tape. Trace analysis of the pistol shows Tom owned it. Deborah's DNA is on it. The same gun that killed Tom is the gun that put a bullet through Deborah's leg. The staging did not hold. They ask if she disposed of Tom's phone at the gorge. She denies it. They ask whether Johnny knew about Tom. He did not. They ask why she searched about residue. She has no answer. They ask why she insisted on being treated as a victim while the man who loved her lay wrapped in bags down the hall. She says she did not kill him. The facts say otherwise. Months later, in court, the story ends without a trial. In March 2023, Deborah Fraser pleads guilty to murder with a firearm specification, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. The judge sentences her to 15 years for the murder, with an additional 8 years for the other crimes, to be served one after the other. Her earliest chance at parole arrives in early August 2046. Almost exactly 23 years from the day she killed Thomas Whittle. The apartment is quiet now. The light in the bedroom is off. The comforter is gone. The only sound is the hum of an air vent, and the echo of a promise home should have kept. Before we go any further, I just want to ask you for a small favor. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. We recently hit 100,000 subscribers, and that's all thanks to you. Our 100K special surprise was revealed, and we had many positive responses from you. Our next goal is to hit 200K before the year ends. It feels impossible, but hey, it's free to dream, right? Also, there's a hidden word somewhere in this video for you. Let's see if you can find it. Now, back to the video. It was a story that no one in the quiet Milwaukee suburb of Waukesha, Wisconsin could have imagined. For the first time, Peyton Loetner, often called Bella by her friends, began speaking about what happened to her 5 years earlier. Her words were heavy, filled with a sense of survival that seemed almost impossible. She admitted that she should not be alive after that day. By all accounts, she should not have survived. Yet she was here, recounting the events that left scars both visible and hidden. It began like any ordinary childhood gathering, a slumber party to celebrate a birthday. It was Friday night, the 30th of May, 2014, and Peyton was heading to her best friend Morgan Geyser's house. Morgan was celebrating her 12th birthday, and the excitement of a sleepover filled the air. Peyton was thrilled, not just because of the party, but because Morgan had always been someone she looked out for. They had met back in 4th grade, and Peyton noticed Morgan was a loner who needed a friend. She reached out, and from that moment, the two grew close. That night at the party, there was another girl with them, Anissa Wire, who had recently joined their circle after moving to the school. The three of them laughed, played in Morgan's bedroom, and ran up and down the stairs. The sound of giggles echoed in the house. It was just the sort of innocent night you would expect from 12-year-olds celebrating a birthday. But by the following morning, nothing would remain innocent. The girls suggested a walk to the park, and then into the nearby woods. Peyton thought little of it. After all, what harm could come from a simple walk in Waukesha, Wisconsin? It was a safe place. People didn't expect bad things to happen in quiet suburban neighborhoods. As they wandered deeper into the trees, Peyton noticed that things began to feel different. The suggestion of playing hide-and-seek seemed harmless at first. Anissa told her to lie on the ground and cover herself with sticks and leaves, disguising herself as part of the woods. Peyton went along, thinking it was just another silly game, but this was no game. It was a setup. Suddenly, Morgan turned to Peyton, speaking strange words. "Don't be afraid. I'm only a little kitty cat," she said, before pouncing on her and driving a knife into her again and again. 19 stab wounds tore into Peyton's arms, legs, and abdomen. The shock was so great that her body went numb. She recalled not even feeling pain at first. Her body was shutting down, protecting her from the unimaginable reality.
Do you remember when it started?
Kind of. I didn't feel anything because my body was in shock.
Morgan and Anissa then gave her instructions that sounded almost mocking. They told her to lie down, that she would lose blood more slowly that way, promising they would go get help. But it was a cruel lie. Anissa later admitted they never planned to get her help. In fact, she told investigators that they wanted her to die.
And they told her they were going to go get her help, but Anissa flat out said, no, we weren't getting her help. We wanted her to die.
Still, Peyton did not give up. Summoning strength she didn't even know she had, she forced herself to move. She staggered out of the woods until she reached a patch of grass. Collapsing near a bike path, a passing bicyclist spotted her, bloodied and weak, and immediately called 911. When the first officer, Dan Clean, arrived on the scene, Peyton whispered the unthinkable. She told him her friend Morgan had done this to her. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital. She could barely breathe and said she could not see. Her body was breaking down. When doctors examined her, they realized just how close she had come to death. The stab wound to her chest was so deep that had it gone even the width of a single human hair deeper, it would have pierced her heart and ended her life. The surgeon later told her mother that it was nothing short of a miracle she survived. Meanwhile, as Peyton was fighting for her life, police were searching for Morgan and Anissa. Hours passed before they were found walking along Interstate 94. They had been wandering for nearly 5 hours, heading toward northern Waukesha. When officers approached them, the two girls seemed calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. They were sitting quietly on the side of the freeway. At the police station, detectives began questioning them. What struck investigators most was their demeanor. They were not panicked or remorseful. Morgan, despite still wearing blood-stained clothes, seemed relaxed, even detached from what had happened. At one point, she casually asked about Peyton, calling her by her nickname. "Is Bella dead?" she inquired, as though the answer did not matter much to her. When told that Peyton was in the hospital, the interrogations revealed chilling details. Both girls admitted they had been planning this attack for 6 months. When detectives asked why, Anissa said it was because they feared someone would kill their families if they did not. That someone, she explained, was a figure named Slender Man. Slender Man was not a real person, but a fictional character born out of online horror stories known as creepypasta. He was described as a tall, faceless figure in a black suit who preyed on children, with long tendrils that could strangle his victims. To Anissa and Morgan, Slender Man was real. They believed they had to kill someone to prove themselves worthy of him, to show their loyalty, and to prevent him from harming their families. When pressed, Anissa admitted it was Morgan's idea to kill Peyton, but she went along because she believed they had no choice. She described Slender Man as living in a mansion deep in the woods, a place they hoped to reach after leaving Peyton behind. Detectives listened in disbelief. These were 12-year-old girls calmly speaking about an attempted murder, as though it were a task given to them. Morgan even said she had thought about feeling bad, but decided that remorse would get her nowhere. In her words, it was easier to live without regrets. Back at the hospital, Peyton's mother sat by her side, grateful beyond words that her daughter was still alive. The sight of her covered in stab wounds was unbearable, but the relief of knowing she had survived overshadowed the horror. The entire community of Waukesha was left shaken. Parents, teachers, and neighbors were all asking themselves how something like this could happen, and how two young girls could be influenced so deeply by a character from the internet. The case gained nationwide attention, sparking conversations about the impact of online stories and the vulnerabilities of impressionable minds. It also raised difficult questions about mental health, accountability, and how far the imagination of a child could go when fear and belief collide. For Peyton, survival meant more than just overcoming the physical injuries. It meant living with the memory of betrayal by those she trusted most. But in her resilience, there was also strength. She walked away from the woods that day, refusing to let her story end there. Against all odds, she lived to tell it. And though the scars remain, her voice carries the truth of what happened on that spring morning. In May 2014, when a childhood sleepover turned into one of the most shocking crimes the community had ever seen. Peter Gerald Scully was born on the 13th of January, 1963, in Melbourne, Australia. At first glance, nothing about his early years suggested the path he would later take. He married, had 2 children, and lived in a quiet suburb called Marie Warren. To neighbors, he seemed like an ordinary man, perhaps ambitious, but hardly remarkable. Yet behind this outward appearance of normality, Scully was already shaping a double life. He was a man who wore masks well, able to convince people he was trustworthy, while quietly sinking deeper into deception and crime. After separating from his family, he moved into central Melbourne. The move was more than geographic, it was symbolic. It gave him space, freedom, and anonymity to pursue schemes on a larger scale, and he wasted no time. Scully entered the world of property development, presenting himself as a successful entrepreneur with grand visions. He became co-director of at least 2 companies that, on paper, looked legitimate. They promised housing projects in Ballarat, Victoria. They secured millions of dollars in funding, convincing investors that returns would be quick and guaranteed. But it was all smoke and mirrors. The houses never existed. No construction ever took place. Instead, the money disappeared into Scully's pockets and bank accounts abroad. When the companies inevitably collapsed, creditors were left facing staggering losses of around $4 million. For many, it was life savings gone in an instant. The Australian Securities and Investments Commission investigated the matter thoroughly. By the year 2009, investigators uncovered over 100 offenses tied to Scully's fraud, deception, and other financial crimes. Authorities were circling closer, preparing charges. Yet, before they could bring him to justice, Scully slipped through their grasp. In the year 2011, he fled Australia entirely, boarding a flight to Manila in the Philippines. This move marked the start of a darker chapter. In Australia, his crimes revolved around fraud. In Southeast Asia, his appetite for exploitation expanded. Even before leaving Melbourne, there had been disturbing signs. He had traveled to Malaysia and returned with a teenage girl he referred to as his girlfriend, Ling. Witnesses described troubling behavior, manipulation, psychological control, and cruelty. One account revealed how he once locked her outside his apartment without clothes as punishment. Associates who knew him painted the same picture: a man devoid of empathy, motivated by money, control, and self-gratification. In the Philippines, Scully settled in Cagayan de Oro, on the island of Mindanao. This was no coincidence. The city was a hub of both commerce and poverty. Countless children lived in fragile conditions, with families struggling to survive. Vulnerability was everywhere, and Scully saw opportunity in tragedy. He built connections quickly, partnering with locals who either trusted him or were themselves desperate enough to collaborate. He presented himself as an investor, a foreign businessman with resources and big plans. But beneath that polished mask, he constructed a network rooted in manipulation. He became involved in property rentals, land transactions, and other ventures that seemed ordinary on the surface. Yet many of these projects were fronts, designed not for growth, but for hiding his operations. Scully's methods were calculated. He was skilled at winning trust, making promises, and then breaking them. He would recruit accomplices, not always by force, but through persuasion, money, or false assurances. People who thought they were working with him on legitimate businesses soon realized they were caught in schemes far beyond what they had signed up for. His fraud extended internationally. Reports later revealed he had transferred large sums overseas, hiding money in accounts that were difficult for authorities to trace. The financial web he created stretched far beyond the Philippines, touching multiple countries and making him harder to catch. But fraud wasn't enough for him. Scully's actions revealed a consistent pattern. He sought power in every form. Money was his first obsession, but control over others quickly became another. He exploited gaps in law enforcement, weaknesses in social safety nets, and the vulnerability of those who had little to protect themselves. By the mid-2010s, his name began surfacing in international investigations. Authorities in both Australia and the Philippines were tracking his movements. Reports of financial crimes, abuse, and exploitation piled up. It was becoming clear that Scully wasn't just a con man. He was a predator whose ambitions knew no bounds. What made Scully particularly dangerous was his ability to adapt. In Australia, he masqueraded as a property developer. In the Philippines, he shifted to being an investor and mentor. He could read people, identify their weaknesses, and exploit them with precision. To some, he promised wealth. To others, he promised opportunity. But every promise ended the same way, with betrayal. Eventually, the walls began to close in. Local authorities, working with international partners, intensified their efforts. Survivors and witnesses stepped forward with testimony. Former associates described his behavior in chilling terms. One summed him up bluntly. Peter was driven by one thing: money. Everything else was just a tool to get it. The truth is that Scully's story is not just about one man's descent into crime. It is about the way systems can be exploited by individuals who know how to manipulate them. In Australia, loopholes in property investment laws allowed him to secure millions without accountability. In the Philippines, poverty and corruption gave him cover. His story highlights how vulnerable communities already struggling can become targets for those who see opportunity in weakness. When he was finally arrested, it was not just an Australian victory or a Filipino victory, it was an international one. His capture represented years of painstaking investigation and collaboration between agencies determined to stop him. The case shocked the world, not only because of the scale of his crimes, but also because it revealed how someone could operate for so long under the radar. It raised pressing questions. How can we protect vulnerable populations from exploitation? How do we hold fraudsters accountable before they vanish overseas? And how do we balance the promise of investment with the risk of deception? Peter Scully's life serves as a grim warning. Behind charm can lie corruption. Behind promises of wealth can lurk schemes designed to destroy. And behind the mask of an entrepreneur can be a predator, whose real business is suffering. Today, Scully's name remains synonymous with betrayal. His story continues to be studied as an example of how greed, left unchecked, can devastate lives across continents. In the end, the lesson is clear. Vigilance matters. Systems must be strengthened. Communities must be protected. And the world must never underestimate the damage that can be caused by a single individual consumed by deception. Her name was Kitty Genovese, a young woman whose murder became infamous not only across New York, but around the world. It was not simply the brutality of her death that made headlines, but the belief that dozens of people had heard her cries for help and chose to do nothing. For decades, her story has been told in classrooms, psychology lectures, and books, and her name has become synonymous with what is now called the bystander effect, that chilling tendency of people to look away when trouble unfolds right in front of them. In March of 1964, Kitty was living in Queens, New York. She was 28 years old, independent, vibrant, and well-liked in her community. But in the early hours of a cold morning, her life was cut short. Newspaper reports at the time claimed that at least 38 residents of her apartment building heard her screams, and yet not one of them came down to help her. Nothing. No witnesses. Just a lot of listeners, one report declared. That became the legacy of Kitty Genovese, and for years it painted New Yorkers as cold, unfeeling, and unwilling to intervene. But as the 50th anniversary of her murder approached, new revelations began to reshape the story. Kevin Cook, the author of a book on Kitty's case, argued that the reality was more complicated. The idea that nearly 40 people watched without lifting a finger was, he said, an exaggeration that stuck in the public imagination. On that March night, Kitty had almost made it home when she became aware of footsteps behind her. It was after 3 in the morning. She was walking along Austin Street when a man caught up with her. That man was Winston Moseley. He attacked swiftly, stabbing her twice in the back. In agony, Kitty screamed out, "Oh God, I have been stabbed." Her voice carried into the surrounding apartments, startling people awake. What happened next is where myth and reality begin to part ways. Moseley, perhaps startled by the sound of her cries, fled briefly. Kitty managed to stand and stumble away, desperately trying to find safety. People who looked out of their windows saw her struggling to her feet, trying to move forward. To those watching, it may have seemed that she had shaken off her attacker, that the danger had passed. Some returned to bed, believing the commotion was over. They did not know that Kitty, gravely wounded, was still in mortal danger. She staggered into the darkness, making her way toward the entrance of a nearby building. With immense effort, she managed to slip inside the vestibule of the apartment block. But it was there that Moseley returned. Finding her again, he raped and stabbed her to death in the small, dimly lit entranceway. According to Cook's research, at least one man at the top of the stairs saw part of this final assault unfold. He did not come down, and he did not intervene. To him, and to others, fear and uncertainty seemed to outweigh action. The horror of the crime deepened when, 2 weeks later, the New York Times published a front-page story with the headline, "37 who saw murder did not call the police." It was a shocking number, one that captured the world's attention. Sermons were delivered in churches about urban apathy. The case became gossip, a cautionary tale about life in big cities. In a way, Kitty's death went viral in the 1960s, decades before the age of the internet. Yet Kevin Cook insisted that the number was misleading. He explained that there were dozens of ear witnesses and a handful of eyewitnesses. But the idea that nearly 40 people fully understood what was happening and chose not to act was not accurate. In his view, no more than half a dozen truly grasped the gravity of the situation. One resident later told his son that he remembered his own father calling the police that night, trying to get through to report a woman who had been attacked. But in those days, there was no 911 emergency system. Calls to the police could be redirected or delayed. That man swore that his father had indeed made a call, reporting that a woman was staggering outside, clearly injured. He was told to wait, but help never came. That failure, in part, was what inspired the creation of the 911 emergency system in the years that followed. Out of Kitty's tragedy came a reform that would eventually save countless lives. Meanwhile, Winston Moseley was arrested 6 days after the murder. His capture brought relief, but no closure. He confessed to Kitty's killing and to other crimes, and he was sentenced to life in prison, where he remained until his death many decades later. For her family, the grief never truly faded. Kitty's name, however, became larger than her life. She became the symbol of indifference, the warning story of what happens when people do not get involved. Psychologists studied the case intensely. From it grew the concept of the bystander effect, the idea that the more people witness an emergency, the less likely any one person is to step forward. Each assumes someone else will act, and in the end, no one does. The phrase most often associated with the case was a simple one: "I didn't want to get involved." For years, this perception overshadowed the reality. Kitty Genovese was remembered less for the life she lived and more for the inaction of those around her. In reality, some neighbors did shout at the attacker, some did peer out of windows, and at least one person did try to contact the police. But the legend persisted, the image of dozens of eyes staring blankly while a young woman cried out in vain. As time went on, the story became part of American culture. It was taught in universities, referenced in books, and discussed in countless articles. The truth was more complex, but the simplified version carried a weight that changed the way society viewed itself. Kitty's murder was brutal, senseless, and tragic. The attack itself was horrifying enough, but the story that followed magnified its impact. It forced people to question their own willingness to act. If you hear a scream in the night, would you look the other way? If you saw a stranger in distress, would you step forward? Or would you assume someone else already had? The death of Kitty Genovese left scars far beyond her family and friends. It became a mirror held up to society, reflecting fear, hesitation, and the danger of silence. Her case reshaped public perception of safety in cities and influenced the way communities responded to emergencies. Out of her tragedy, America not only debated morality, but also reformed systems, creating ways for people to seek help more quickly. Today, her story remains a haunting reminder of how myths can shape memory, and how even distorted accounts can change the course of history. Winston Moseley was taken off the streets, but Kitty's legacy lived on in every classroom where her name was spoken, every sermon where her story was retold, and every call to 911 that might never have been possible without the lessons learned from her death. Right or wrong, Kitty Genovese is remembered not only for the crime that ended her life, but also for the silence that followed it. Her name endures as a symbol of what people did not do, and as a reminder of what people must do when faced with the cries of another human being. On January 18, 2016, a routine response to a hotel complaint turned into a tableau of fear, confusion, and fatal consequence. In the narrow carpeted corridor outside a La Quinta Inn room in Mesa, Arizona, officers in tactical positions barked orders, while a man named Daniel Shaver moved slowly and painfully to obey. What follows is a close human look at that moment. The clipped commands, the pleading breaths, the impossible margin for error, and the choices that split a life from its next breath. The scene is clinical in description, yet raw in atmosphere. Officers, rifles raised, positioned themselves in the hallway, the dull yellow glow of hotel lights stretching down toward Daniel and the young woman who had been ordered out of the room. A voice from an officer, sharp, insistent, and uncompromising, laid down instructions that felt less like guidance and more like an ultimatum. Hands on your head, fingers interlaced, feet crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. Each order was pronounced with the cold finality of consequence. The commands came fast, sometimes repeated, rehearsed and then sharpened with greater urgency. If you make a mistake, the voice warned, there is a very severe possibility you are going to get shot. The words were not hollow. They bent the air around them, pressing weight onto the very floor Daniel was asked to crawl upon. Daniel and the woman beside him were told to keep their hands visible, to crawl, to kneel, to keep their legs crossed. Each instruction became a test of control, not just of the body, but of nerves frayed by fear. His intoxicated state made his movements slower, less certain, and the pressure to respond perfectly only made each gesture more precarious. The transcript captures this moment with a cold bluntness. Daniel was ordered to crawl toward the officers on his hands and knees, to push himself up into a kneeling position, to raise his hands high into the air.
Stop! Get on the ground, both of you! Lay down on the ground! Lay down on the ground!
He complied, haltingly, each motion heavy with the knowledge that even the smallest hesitation could be fatal. The officer's voice cut through the silence again and again. Do not make a mistake. If you move, we will consider it a threat. The language itself was not neutral. It was weaponized, an instrument of control, and a verbal extension of the rifles already trained on him. With every repetition, the tension escalated. Daniel crawled. He shifted. He placed one hand forward, then the other. The weight of his body shifted uneasily, balance compromised by fear. At one point, an officer cautioned him not to lower his hands even if he felt as though he might fall. If you fall, you will fall on your face, the officer said. If your hands are too small, your back is exposed. We are going to shoot you. The corridor, with its muted carpet and hotel silence, no longer felt like a place of lodging. It became a narrowing funnel, shrinking the safe space available with every instruction, until Daniel was crawling through more dread than distance. There were small, deeply human details in that transcript. Details that make the scene almost unbearable when revisited. The young woman beside him was told to be quiet. The officer demanded silence, as if her very voice could tilt the fragile balance of the standoff. At another moment, Daniel was asked whether he was strong enough to understand the instructions being given, as though his very ability to follow them was on trial. The commands did not just instruct him to move. They reminded him that any move, even a reflex or stumble, would be counted as hostility. Daniel was told to keep his eyes fixed on the carpet beneath him, to interlace his fingers tightly behind his head, to cross his feet one over the other. The cadence of the orders was mechanical, drilled into procedure, but Daniel's responses were entirely human. He muttered, his voice carrying the sound of panic. His breathing grew heavier. He tried to beg, to assure them he was trying to comply. Each command that followed was a weighted demand. Every inch he crawled forward was met with suspicion. In the eyes of those with weapons raised, his efforts to obey became possible preludes to violence. This was not a firefight, not an exchange of weapons. not a chaotic eruption of aggression. The body cam footage later released shows this with devastating clarity. An unarmed man, visibly frightened, tried desperately to comply while multiple officers stood in dominance with rifles leveled at him. Daniel was not advancing with aggression. He was inching forward with hesitation, fumbling once with his clothing, leaning awkwardly to stay balanced. And still the commands kept coming, the warnings repeated. Do not move, do not lower your hands, crawl forward, look down. The environment grew suffocating. It was as though the script for his every action was already written, with no room for error, no allowance for humanity. Then, the crucial moment arrived. Daniel made a motion with his right hand toward his waistline, a small gesture, ambiguous in its intent. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps a reflex to pull up his shorts, perhaps confusion in the swirl of contradictory instructions. Whatever it was the last gesture he ever made. Within a second, an officer fired 5 shots. The bullets struck Daniel repeatedly. The corridor, alive with urgent orders and heavy breaths only moments earlier, was instantly changed into a place of finality. The officer's feared threat and Daniel's attempt at movement both collapsed into one irreversible judgment. The transcript's clipped commands ended. The soundscape shifted from words to silence. A young man's life was extinguished. What followed did not happen in that hallway, but in courtrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms across the country. The shooting prompted criminal charges against the officer who fired, and the footage became the central piece of evidence. The trial ignited debate over the meaning of compliance and the limits of police authority in moments of stress. To one side, the video showed a clear failure of restraint, an execution of a man doing his best to follow nearly impossible commands. To the other, it reflected a split-second decision by an officer who believed his life and his colleagues' lives were in danger. The case ultimately ended in acquittal for the officer, but the arguments surrounding that outcome remain unsettled. Certain facts, though, are difficult to dispute. Daniel Shaver was unarmed when he was shot. The object that led to the initial call, what appeared to be a rifle seen by others at the hotel window, was later identified as a pellet gun used for his job in pest control. He never pointed it at anyone. He was ordered from his room, intoxicated and terrified, and given a sequence of detailed commands that left little margin for error. Each attempt to follow those orders became, paradoxically, one more opportunity for officers to perceive a threat. For Daniel's family, the consequences are personal and permanent. He left behind a wife and 2 daughters. For them, the transcript and the video are not just public evidence, but the last record of a husband and father's life. For civil rights organizations, the case became an emblem of a broader question: how policing practices can transform a frightened, unarmed civilian into a perceived enemy in a matter of minutes. For the officers present that night, the aftermath was marked by scrutiny, internal reviews, and the heavy weight of a tragedy they insisted was unavoidable. The transcript, though short, remains haunting. It is a script of commands that demanded perfection from someone incapable of delivering it under such conditions. It is a record of how language can narrow choices until only disaster remains. Each line, "Shut up, look down, cross your feet, crawl forward," is a reminder of how a man can be guided step by step into the jaws of fatality. In the end, the narrow hotel corridor was both a physical place and a crucible. The rifle barrels, the clipped voice of authority, the crawling figure of Daniel Shaver, all combined into a moment that continues to echo in debates about justice, policing, and the fragile line between order and tragedy. What began as a hotel complaint became, in the span of a few minutes, a defining story of fear, authority, and the finality of 5 shots. It is remembered now, not just for the verdict it produced, but for the chilling clarity of what was recorded. A man begging, obeying, and then, in an instant, gone. The white-haired man at the door is 74-year-old John Arthur Getrew of Hayward, California. He smiles politely at the young woman apologizing for a fender tap in his driveway, steps outside to take a peek, and never sees the handcuffs coming. The driver is an undercover investigator. The ruse works perfectly, as deputies secure the house and shepherd his dog inside. Getrew compliments the ploy, almost admiring the craft. "Good line to get me out." He doesn't know it yet, but a secret that survived nearly half a century is about to snap in two. Cold case detectives in Santa Clara County had quietly reopened a murder that sat unsolved for 45 years. They built a family tree from crime scene DNA and a public genealogy database, then followed the branches to a husband, father, security guard, Boy Scout leader, John Arthur Gautreau. Now in a stark interview room, Sergeant Cortez sits across from him, confirming the basics: name, age, where he grew up. Newark, Ohio. A childhood spent moving base to base for his father's military career. Teenage years in West Germany. Then, a jolt. The sergeant asks if he's ever been arrested. Gautreau says no, and then, almost as if correcting himself from some deeper place, admits he was arrested in Germany as a teenager for murder.
That he had never been arrested, and I found out something happened in Germany.
Okay,
can you tell me about that?
I was arrested in Germany.
Okay.
The victim was 15-year-old Margaret Williams, a chaplain's daughter. She had gone to a youth club dance in 1963 and never made it home. Found the next morning on a baseball diamond, sexually assaulted and strangled. Gautreau claims he didn't even know her. A witness had seen him walking in that direction, he says. He was 18, tried and convicted in German court, sent to a juvenile prison, released after serving roughly 2/3 of a 10-year sentence, then dropped at an Air Force base, picked up by his father, and he says, never heard another word. He returned to the United States, settled in California, and by the mid-70s surfaced again in police files. Palo Alto officers investigated a report that a teenage girl had been lured, assaulted, strangled, and threatened. Gautreau minimizes it. Now, accused, interviewed, nothing happened. Records say otherwise. He received a 6-month sentence, with all but 30 days suspended, those days served on weekends. Sergeant Cortez pivots to the hills above Stanford.
What's the second young lady?
The one up on the hill.
Okay.
Yeah, there's two different places you're talking about.
Okay, one of them's up on the hill?
Yeah.
Does the area around Page Mill Road ring a bell? Did he ever hike the dish? As a scout leader, Gautreau says, he took boys all over the Coast Range, but not there. Cortez slides across a black and white photograph, a bright-eyed young woman. Her name is Leslie Marie Parlov, 21 years old in 1973, a recent Stanford graduate working as a law clerk. She vanished after parking her orange Chevy Nova at an old quarry gate. Her body was found in the Stanford Dish open space, strangled with a floral scarf. Do you recognize her? No. Do you know the name? No. Was she a girlfriend? He smirks and calls her cute, guesses she must be a college kid. Oddly, he volunteers that detail before the sergeant mentions Stanford. The sergeant presses forward. Would he ever strangle a woman? Would he ever commit a sexual assault? I have no reason for it, Gautreau says flatly. Then the question that matters most. If his DNA were found on Leslie, how could that be? He shrugs. He doesn't know. Asked how DNA transfers, he offers 2 routes quickly, semen and saliva, and then stops. Technology is good now, he says. They're catching people every day. He makes his first big slip when he references these 2 persons. The sergeant has only shown 1 photograph. What 2? The one up on the hill. Gautreau answers. And the other one. He backpedals clumsily, but the crack is there. In fact, there was another young woman, 21-year-old Janet Taylor, found in 1974 near Sand Hill Road in the same Stanford Dish corridor, assaulted and strangled. A second investigator enters and turns the screw. Your DNA is on her, and not by accident. The type, the location. There's no innocent explanation. We know you did it. We don't know why. Tell us why.
It's not an accident that your DNA got there. Your DNA and the type of DNA and where it is on the victim, there's no other explanation.
Mm-hmm.
You committed this crime. We know you committed this crime.
Gautreau leans back into denial, dead-eyed and immovable. He knew this day would come, he says, only wonders why it took so long. Then he slips again, distinguishing between the first girl and the one up on the hill, speculating on the time between the killings, hinting at details no innocent man would guess. When the contradictions pile too high, he asks for a lawyer. The interview ends. The evidence does not. Decades-old scrapings from beneath Leslie's fingernails had pointed investigators to Gautreau through genetic genealogy. In January 2019, DNA recovered from the torn crotch of Janet Taylor's underwear matched him as well. The Boy Scout leader, the security guard, the father, the man who politely leashed his dog while deputies zip-tied his wrists. Jury selection came, and with it, the first reckoning. In September 2021, a Santa Clara County jury found John Arthur Gatreo guilty of first-degree murder with the infliction of great bodily injury for killing Janet Taylor. He was sentenced to 7 years to life in prison, a technical minimum in an old law case that in reality meant he would die behind bars. 4 months later, he stood and pleaded guilty to the murder of Leslie Perlov, receiving a second life sentence to run after the first. Behind those convictions lay a pattern as chilling as it was plain. A teenager strangled in Germany in 1963. A teenage victim in Palo Alto in 1975 who survived and reported. 2 young women, 21, plucked from the Stanford orbit in 1973 and 1974. Each assaulted, each strangled, each left in the hills. And between those crimes and the cuffs at his Hayward doorstep, a long, quiet life built like a camouflage net. A family, a uniform, a troop of boys in neckerchiefs, a steady job guarding doors. The quiet cracked because science caught up. Small, brutal truths survive in cells and fibers and knots. A floral scarf holds a killer's grip. A fingernail preserves the last desperate defense of a strangled woman. Fabric torn at a seam carries what a conscience refuses to carry. When the technology arrived to read what the victims had kept, the line to Gatreu formed fast. Even at the end, he kept his distance. No confession, no remorse on camera, just a final procedural request for counsel and the rote shuffles of a defendant through arraignment, trial, and sentence. In prison, time did what time does. According to public reports, John Arthur Gatreu died of natural causes on September 22, 2023, at the age of 79. His DNA profile remains in California's database, a permanent thread that may yet pull shut other open files. In the interview, he spoke like a man watching a wall go up around him, brick by brick, question by question. He called it a brick wall. The detectives called it evidence. The families called it justice, arriving decades late, but arriving in the hills above Stanford, at the Dish trailheads, and along Sand Hill Road. People still walk where Leslie and Janet were found. The wind crosses the same grass. The oak shade falls the same way. What changes is the knowledge. The names are known. The story has an ending, and the small stubborn artifacts that the victims left behind, those quiet messengers, were finally heard. That's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, hit like and subscribe. We post videos almost daily. More videos will pop up in a few seconds, so don't miss them. I am out.